the West River Valley of southern Vermont. With its scenic roads, rolling hills, and rustic structures, offers pure Vermont beauty. As you round the bend on Route 30 in Newfane, your eyes, undoubtedly, will catch the sight of two old abutments in the river. Dozens of motorists drive by every day. But how many people realize that less than 79 years ago, an active railroad crossed overhead here? In the 1800s, southern Vermont realized it needed a faster, more reliable mode of transportation to ship its products and goods. Its answer? A railroad.
The fortunes of the West River Valley were improving as after the period after the Civil War. Railroad fever was infecting the country, and the residents of the West River Valley were no different than anybody else. And merchants wanted an outlet for their products, and they wanted a way to travel back and forth between the villages along the river and to other parts of the country. And that was basically the impetus for driving and building the West River Railroad.
Originating in Brattleboro, the railroad followed the Connecticut River 1 mile north, where it then veered off and followed the West River Valley. It then traveled through Dummerston, Newfane, Townsend, and Jamaica, before arriving here at the South Londonderry terminal, a total distance of 36 miles.
Originally, it was supposed to go from Brattleboro to Londonderry and then over connect to Whitehall, New York, but funding never came through for all that, so they just stopped it, and the terminal in Londonderry was the end of the line.
There's 1,700 people in this town in 2012, and it was about the same, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little less, back in the turn of the century. So it hasn't, and mostly it was because of these people coming up the railroad.
Oh, hi there. When construction was completed in 1880, it was claimed that the journey from Brattleboro to South Londonderry would only take 2 hours. While in reality it was closer to 4 hours, it still beat the 2-day trek by horse and buggy.
Initially they ran 3 trains a day, 1 freight train and 2 passenger trains, but some of my schedules have shown up to 5 trains a day. The train schedules tended to follow the rising and falling economy.
At the time, of course, there wasn't automobiles, and so a trip to Brattleboro was a pretty major trip, and this just really cut that down. It also helped out with people that wanted to sell goods or receive goods outside of the local valley, and it served a really good purpose for that.
Whether it was milk from the company in Brattleboro, local lumber and farm products, or even mail, the railroad was essential to delivering them in a timely manner. Another forgotten aspect of this railroad were the old quarries. In the late 1800s, a handful of quarries formed on Black Mountain in Dummerston. This railroad was the key to shipping granite from these quarries out to Brattleboro and the East Coast. Its Dummerston white granite was used in monuments, street work, and structures including such prestigious buildings as the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan. This granite production brought lots of revenue to the town, state, and railroad. And even when the railroad was on its last leg, the quarry bought the rights to the 6 miles of track from Dummerston to Brattleboro in order to continue production. Without this railroad, it would have been all but impossible to get the stone from these quarries out.
All enterprises have their successes and their failures, and a successful business can adapt to change, but at a certain point, either it becomes redundant and it goes away, or a success and stays.
If you ask somebody back in, like, say, the 1890s, after it'd been for 10 years, they would say that probably the benefits outweighed the troubles. That all changed after the turn of the century, I think. There was a lot of derailments. A lot of it had to do with being the narrow gauge and just the terrain, the geography, and the storms and being close to the river, it had a lot of problems. One of the worst accidents was the one down to the three bridges in Brattleboro, where it crosses the mouth of the West River. As the train got to Brattleboro, they got onto that bridge, but the whole bridge collapsed.
Behind me is where one of the worst disasters struck the line on August 18, 1886. As a southbound mixed train crossed over the West River, the wooden trestle collapsed, dropping the entire train, including a passenger car, 40 feet to the water below. While the bridge was a total loss, the engine was raised and rebuilt, and, by some miracle, only 2 lives were lost in the end. After the accident, the railroad upgraded to a steel trestle. In part, this was preparing for the upgrade to standard gauge, which took place in 1905.
The conversion to standard gauge allowed them now to avoid having to offload and reload in Brattleboro.
With the rails being unified to standard gauge, this meant that trains from the West River Railroad could now continue on any track, rather than having to reload everything onto standard gauge cars.
Once they got the standard gauge stabilized, that it was worth it. But then, unfortunately, the time period was that the automobile was starting to be pretty widely used.
The train was faster than a horse and buggy, but the automobile definitely was faster than the train.
Despite the upgrades, there were still a lot of hardships that struck the line. From mudslides and boulders falling onto the tracks, to the flood of 1927, which devastated much of the railroad.
The 27 flood basically ended, the economic viability of the line. Of course, in 1929 we had the Depression, and at that point the country slid into the Depression. When the railroad came back in 31, basically all of the business had evaporated or moved to trucks by that time.
Despite trying new renovations, such as a gasoline-powered rail bus, upkeep of the tracks and trains, and a lack of business due to the rise of automobiles ultimately proved to be too much. And in 1936, all except what the quarry now owned was abandoned or scrapped. Even though the railroad has long since been abandoned and torn up, there are still numerous places remnants can be seen, and areas all along Route 30 with access of some sort to the old line. Out of all the access points, 4 stand out as the easiest to get to. The first spot is all the way to the south in Brattleboro. Enter at Spring Tree Road and head towards the Marina restaurant. Follow the road towards the field, where you'll find a parking area on the right. The trail begins here and travels just under 3 miles north before it runs into a set of power lines, and then Rice Farm Road. The next spot is all the way to the north, near the South Londonderry Terminal. Locate the terminal right off of Route 100 at West River Street. About 6/10 of a mile down West River Street, you'll find a small parking area. The trail is straight ahead, marked by a yellow gate. It travels 2 miles south, where it connects with the next access point, Winhall Brook Camping Area on Winhall Station Road in Jamaica, which offers north and south trail access. It also has a great remnant of one of the old railroad bridges. The last area is in Jamaica State Park. This trail follows the river 2 miles north toward Ball Mountain Dam and connects with the south trail from Winhall Brook Camping Area. And if you're truly into it, you can even rent a campsite that lays on the old rail bed while you're at this park. And a little added bonus for today. As you're hiking, you may get lucky and see some wildlife. Or... What is this? An anxious pup. I'm 10 feet away from you, love. You're funny. I'd also like to take this moment to mention that some of these places either have an entry fee or rules. And even if the rules aren't something that you'd naturally want to... So as I was saying, these places sometimes have rules. And even if they're not what you would naturally choose to do or even want to do, they're there for a reason, and it's important that you follow them.
Excuse me, sir, didn't you see the sign? No dogs.
Dog? I don't have a dog. What are you talking about?
That right there, sir.
That's not a dog. This is my baby. Yeah, follow the rules. Even if you're just walking through the woods, you may stumble across an old remnant or two. It can really get your imagination going about what once was there. Even this stretch of Route 30 used to be the old railroad. And it's really easy to find as it's a stretch of road right next to the Mary Meyer factory in Townsend. While a lot of the old line has been converted to other uses such as roads, power line right-of-ways, and trails, other sections have altogether been destroyed. In the 1960s, the Army Corps of Engineers came through and built flood control dams along the West River. While this was good for public safety, it unfortunately destroyed parts of the rail bed. Seeing that the river in Townsend and Jamaica provided perfect locations, large dams were built in each town, causing the river to flood out whole villages and the railroad. Despite the fact that large areas have been destroyed, or now lay on private property, one can still make a full day out of hiking on the public sections. Another thing to keep in mind before you start hiking the trails is you might want to stop and get some food and water. One of my favorite spots to stop is the Harmonyville store. They have good food, good pricing, and it's right across from Depot Road, home to one of the original station houses. Of the original 10 station houses, 6 still remain. While some are in their original locations, others have been moved or converted into private residences. The South Londonderry terminal, however, is still accessible to the public. Even though the railroad's been gone for years, there's still plenty of history, so long as you know where to look.